Why was everyone laughing at her? The Combat Information Center of the USS Vigilance hummed with controlled chaos. Screens glowed emerald and sapphire. Data streams flowed like rivers of light. And in the center of it all stood Admiral Thorne, a four-star peacock among eagles, his voice cutting through the tension like a dull blade. "Commander Morgan," his words boomed across the bridge. "I've reviewed your file, systems analyst, lab work, screen time." He paused, letting the silence build. "Tell me, what's your confirmed kill count?" The bridge crew shifted. Some smirked, others looked away. They all knew what was coming. "Zero," the Admiral answered his own question. "Maybe one, if you count a particularly stubborn computer virus." Laughter rippled through the room. Nervous, sycophantic. The kind of laughter that happens when a superior officer makes a joke, whether it's funny or not. Lieutenant Commander Evelyn Morgan stood perfectly still. Her uniform seemed a size too large on her small frame. Her face revealed nothing. No flinch. No flicker of her eyes. She simply stared at the secondary monitoring console, her hands resting on the controls with the gentle precision of someone who'd done this 10,000 times before. Her silence was a vacuum in that high-pressure room. But silence, as she knew, could be the most powerful weapon of all. On the far side of the bridge, Fleet Master Chief Jacobs watched. 3 decades at sea had taught him to read people the way others read books, and what he saw in Lieutenant Commander Morgan wasn't weakness. It was something else entirely, something coiled, something patient, something waiting. The Admiral didn't see it. He saw a pencil pusher, a woman out of place on a warship, someone who belonged in a server room, not on the sharp end of steel and kinetics. He was wrong. The war games, Neptune's Fury, were reaching their final day. Admiral Thorne had come aboard like a visiting dignitary, inspecting the fleet, critiquing everything, making sure everyone knew he was the most important person in the room. He'd singled her out immediately. The quiet nail that stuck out. The one who didn't react. The one who didn't defend herself. And that bothered him more than anything. "You see, out here on the sharp end," he continued, gesturing at the holographic display where dozens of blue and red icons danced their simulated ballet of war, "we deal in kinetics, steel on steel, not ones and zeros." His voice dripped with condescension. "It's a different world, Commander, a world of instinct, command presence, something they don't teach you in a server room." Eve Morgan said nothing. Her fingers traced a diagnostic pattern on her screen. Fluid, economical. She was an island of calm in the Admiral's turbulent wake. The ship's captain, Commander Phillips, stood beside the Admiral, jaw tight. He knew Morgan's reputation. The real one, not the sanitized version in her official file. She'd been sent from Naval Cyber Command to integrate experimental sensor fusion software into the Aegis combat system. Her official role was advisory. Her actual function was to ensure a multi-billion-dollar system didn't crash under the immense strain of the war games. The junior officers didn't know any of that. They only saw what the Admiral wanted them to see. A quiet woman being dressed down by a flag officer. A simple power dynamic. A demonstration of the chain of command. They saw her silence as weakness. They mistook her stillness for fear. What they couldn't comprehend was that her silence was a fortress built brick by brick over a career they couldn't possibly imagine. It was a discipline honed in places where a single spoken word could mean the difference between life and death. Her calm wasn't an absence of emotion. It was perfect, deliberate control over it. While the Admiral spoke of kinetics, Eve Morgan was running 1,000 silent calculations. Her mind sifted through data streams, identified phantom signals, filtered electronic noise with the effortless grace of a virtuoso. She wasn't merely observing the battle. She was perceiving its underlying mathematical soul. The irony, lost on everyone but perhaps the observant Master Chief, was that Admiral Thorne, the man of steel on steel, was the most disconnected person on the bridge. He saw icons on a map as game pieces. Eve Morgan saw the complex physics they represented: vectors, velocities, the subtle energy signatures that betrayed a vessel's true intent. Her world of ones and zeros was infinitely more real than his. The tension was palpable now, thick, heavy. The ship sliced through deep Atlantic water, its gas turbine engines thrumming beneath their feet, a constant reminder of the immense power held in check. Admiral Thorne continued his monologue. He critiqued the tactical action officer's simulated missile launch, questioned the navigator's course correction, spread his abrasive authority like a contagion. Each comment was a performance designed to reinforce his own perceived importance. And through it all, his gaze kept flicking back to Lieutenant Commander Morgan. Her quiet refusal to be rattled was a personal affront. He wanted a reaction. He wanted her to stammer, to blush, to offer a clumsy defense of her technical background. Her stoicism was a mirror he didn't want to look into. "The problem with you tech types," he declared, his voice rising to address the entire bridge, "is you trust the machine too much. You forget that war is a human endeavor. It's about grit. It's about looking your enemy in the eye." He paused for effect. "You can't do that from a keyboard." Still nothing. Eve's focus remained absolute. She adjusted a filter, her knuckles brushing against a small, worn brass plaque on the edge of her console. It was old, almost forgotten, a relic from a previous system iteration left in place for redundancy. The plaque simply read, "Point Michael's Ward." To the rest of the crew, it was a curiosity. To Eve, it was an anchor. Commander Phillips, sensing the escalating discomfort and the dangerous distraction the Admiral was creating, finally interjected. "Admiral, Red Force is initiating their final attack run, a coordinated supersonic cruise missile launch." He pointed to the main display, where half a dozen red triangles detached from a larger icon, representing an enemy cruiser. "This is the main event." The Admiral puffed out his chest. "Excellent. Let's see what this state-of-the-art warship can do. Let's see the kinetics in action." The atmosphere shifted instantly. The simulated attack was the climax of the exercise, the ultimate test of the ship's crew and its complex, interwoven systems. Voices became sharp, clipped, professional. "Tau Aegis is tracking all 6 inbound threats. Firing solution is green. Spy 1 is locked." The tactical action officer's voice was steady. "Weapons free on my command." The Admiral nodded approvingly. This was what he understood, the clean, decisive application of force. He spared one last dismissive glance at Morgan. Her work, he assumed, was done. The algorithms she had so painstakingly calibrated were now in the hands of the real warriors. He was wrong. But what happened next, no one expected. The first sign that something was amiss was a flicker, a barely perceptible hesitation in the smooth flow of data across the main screen. Eve Morgan saw it instantly. Her posture, already perfect, stiffened by a single infinitesimal degree. It was a subtle discord in the symphony of data, a note played just slightly out of key, the kind only a master would notice. The exercise was supposed to be controlled chaos, a high-stakes performance where every action was scripted and every outcome, win or lose, was a learning experience. But war, even simulated war, has a way of improvising. As the 6 red icons screamed toward the Vigilance, a 7th appeared. It was a ghost, a phantom. It wasn't red or blue. It was stark, menacing gray. And it was moving faster than anything should move. "Contact bearing 090, the radar operator called out, his voice uncertain. "Designate unknown track Alpha 7, speed. Sir, I'm reading Mach 8, altitude. It's diving." Commander Phillips' head snapped toward the display. "What the hell is that? Red Force wasn't authorized for hypersonics." The Admiral's confident expression faltered. "Is this part of the scenario?" Negative, sir. The tactical action officer's voice had lost its steady edge. Alpha 7 is not on the exercise manifest. Aegis is having trouble acquiring a lock. The signature is erratic. Eve Morgan's fingers moved. Not fast, not frantically, with the calm, measured precision of a surgeon mid-operation. She'd already switched her console to manual override. The secondary monitoring station, the one with the old brass plaque, suddenly lit up with data streams the modern systems weren't even tracking. "It's a drone," she said quietly, her first words since the Admiral had begun his performance. "Experimental, probably ours. Someone on Red Force got creative." Her voice cut through the rising panic like a blade through fog. Commander Phillips turned to her. "Can you identify it?" "Working on it." Her hands danced across the controls. Lines of code scrolled across her screen. She was speaking the machine's language now, having a conversation the rest of the crew couldn't hear. The Admiral stepped closer, his earlier condescension replaced by something approaching concern. "Commander, if this is a rogue asset—" "It's not rogue," she interrupted softly. "It's just very, very fast." The drone was seconds from the ship now. The main Aegis system, designed for traditional threats, kept losing the lock. Too fast, too agile, the algorithms couldn't predict its next move. But Eve Morgan wasn't using the algorithms. She was using something older, something forgotten. The manual targeting system on the Point Michael's Ward console, a relic from a previous generation, less sophisticated, but also less reliant on AI prediction models. "Tao," she said, her voice steady, "I need you to trust me. Aegis can't track this. It's moving in a pattern the system doesn't recognize." The tactical action officer looked at Commander Phillips. Phillips looked at the Admiral. Time stretched. The drone was 3 miles out, then 2. "Do it," Commander Phillips said. Eve Morgan's hands moved with absolute certainty now. She wasn't guessing. She was calculating physics, trajectories, the way a musician hears a melody before playing it. "Firing solution locked," she said. "Manual override engaged. Recommend immediate launch, tube 3. "Launch," the tactical action officer commanded. A simulated missile, Icon, leapt from the Vigilance. The gray drone jinked left. The missile adjusted. The drone dove. The missile followed. And then on the main display, both icons merged into a single bright flash. The bridge went silent. "Splash 1, the radar operator said, his voice hushed. "Alpha 7 is down." For a moment nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The 6 original red missiles, the ones everyone had been focused on, were intercepted seconds later by the Aegis system exactly as planned. But those were easy. Those were expected. The drone was different. Admiral Thorne stared at the screen, then at the console, then at Lieutenant Commander Evelyn Morgan. She hadn't moved. Her expression remained calm. She simply began shutting down the manual override, returning control to the main system, as if she'd just completed a routine diagnostic. "Commander," the Admiral said slowly, his voice had lost its boom. What did you just do?" She looked at him for the first time. Her eyes were clear, direct, unafraid. "I intercepted a threat, sir." "With a manual targeting system?" "Yes, sir." "Against a Mach 8 hypersonic drone?" "Yes, sir." He blinked, processing, recalibrating. The bridge crew was staring now, not with dismissal, with something approaching awe. Fleet Master Chief Jacobs allowed himself the smallest smile. The Admiral's jaw worked silently for a moment. Then he did something unexpected. He nodded, once, a gesture of respect between equals. "I stand corrected, Commander," he said quietly. Apparently, looking the enemy in the eye works just as well from a keyboard. It was the closest thing to an apology the crew had ever heard from him. Eve Morgan simply nodded back. No triumph in her expression, no vindication, just quiet acceptance. "The system worked as designed, sir," she said. But everyone on that bridge knew the truth. The system hadn't saved them. She had. And in that moment, everything changed. The aftermath was quieter than the crisis itself. Admiral Thorne stood off to the side now, his earlier bluster deflated like a punctured balloon. He watched as Commander Phillips and the tactical action officer reviewed the engagement data, their voices low and technical. The bridge crew moved around Lieutenant Commander Morgan with a new awareness, giving her space, offering glances that held something they hadn't before. Respect. But she didn't seem to notice. Or perhaps she simply didn't need it. She was already back to work, running diagnostics on the manual targeting system, checking for anomalies, ensuring everything was properly logged. The exercise continued. The simulated battle concluded. Red Force was declared neutralized. Blue Force achieved tactical superiority. The war games on paper were a success. But the real lesson had happened in those few seconds, when a quiet woman at a forgotten console had done what a billion-dollar AI could not. Hours later, as the crew secured from General Quarters, Fleet Master Chief Jacobs approached her station. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, arms crossed, watching her work. "You knew it was coming," he said finally. "Not a question, a statement." Eve glanced up briefly, then back to her screen. The signature was unusual. "I flagged it 2 minutes before it appeared on radar." "And you didn't say anything." "I wasn't certain." She paused. "And I knew the system would react poorly if I created unnecessary alarm." Jacobs nodded slowly. "You let them think you were just a tech." "I am just a tech, Master Chief." "No, ma'am," he shook his head. "You're a lot more than that." She didn't respond. Her fingers continued their dance across the keyboard, adjusting parameters, refining algorithms. Jacob studied her for a moment longer. "You've done this before," he said. "The manual intercept, this wasn't your first time." Her hands paused, just for a fraction of a second, then resumed. "That's classified, Master Chief." He smiled, figured as much. He straightened up, preparing to leave, then stopped. "For what it's worth, Commander, the Admiral's not a bad man, just a little too in love with his own voice." "Most people are," she said softly. "Not you." She looked up at him then, really looked. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, a weariness, a weight. "Words are easy, Master Chief. Anyone can talk, but when the missile's in the air, talk doesn't matter. Only action does." He held her gaze. "Where'd you learn that?" "Places I can't tell you about," she said. "Doing things I can't talk about, for reasons that are still classified." Jacobs nodded. He'd been in the Navy long enough to recognize a shadow operator when he saw one. Someone who'd spent time in the dark corners of national security. Someone who'd been erased from official records for the sake of operational security. "Well," he said, "I'm glad you're on our side." She almost smiled, almost, "So am I." He left her there, alone with her screens and her silence. And as he walked away, he thought about all the sailors he'd served with over 3 decades. The loud ones, the flashy ones, the ones who made sure everyone knew how important they were. And then he thought about Lieutenant Commander Evelyn Morgan, the one who didn't need anyone to know, because she already knew herself. Admiral Thorne found her later that evening in the ship's mess. She was sitting alone, eating a simple meal, reading a technical manual like it was a novel. He hesitated before approaching. Pride was a hard thing to swallow, especially for a man who'd spent decades cultivating an image of absolute confidence. But something about what had happened on that bridge had shaken him, not just the intercept, but the realization of how wrong he'd been, how blind. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. She looked up surprised. "Of course, sir." He sat across from her, his tray untouched. For a long moment he said nothing, just looked at her, really looked at her, seeing her for the first time. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. That's not necessary, sir. Yes, it is. He leaned forward slightly. I made assumptions about you, about your capabilities, about what matters on a warship. He shook his head. I was wrong. She set down her fork. You weren't entirely wrong, Admiral. I'm not a warrior, not in the traditional sense. I don't have confirmed kills. I've never looked an enemy in the eye. Everything I do happens at a distance, through screens, through data. But you saved this ship today. I did my job. It was more than that. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Where did you serve before this? Your file is sparse. Classified assignments, sir. Intelligence community. Naval special warfare support. Places where records don't exist. You were operational. In a manner of speaking. He nodded slowly, understanding dawning. The quiet professional. Something like that. They sat in silence for a moment. Around them, sailors moved through the mess, their conversations a low hum of exhausted relief. The war games were over. Tomorrow they'd return to port. I've spent my entire career, the Admiral said, believing that leadership meant being the loudest voice in the room, the most certain, the most commanding. He looked down at his hands. But watching you today, you didn't say a word until it mattered, and when you did, everyone listened. Respect isn't demanded, sir, it's earned. I'm beginning to understand that. He met her eyes. Thank you, Commander, for the lesson and for keeping us safe. She nodded once. You're welcome, sir. He stood to leave, then paused. One more thing, that console you used, Point Michael's ward, what's the story there? Her expression softened, just slightly. Lieutenant Michael Ward, killed in action 2009, Afghanistan. He was a fire control technician. Brilliant. One of the best I ever worked with. She touched the edge of her tray. He taught me that the old systems, the manual ones, they're not obsolete. They're backup, insurance, the thing you trust when everything else fails. He'd be proud of you. I hope so. The Admiral nodded and walked away, leaving her alone again with her thoughts and her memories. And in that quiet moment, Evelyn Morgan allowed herself something she rarely did. She allowed herself to feel. Word spread fast. By the next morning, everyone on the Vigilance knew what had happened. The junior officers who'd laughed at her during the Admiral's performance now avoided her eyes when they passed in the corridors. Not out of shame exactly, out of realization. They'd misjudged her. Badly. Commander Phillips found her in the CIC before sunrise, running final system checks before they made port. You're up early, he said. Habit, sir. He joined her at the console, watching the data streams flow across her screen. The Admiral's putting you in for a commendation. Navy Achievement Medal at minimum. She didn't look up. That's not necessary. He disagrees. So do I. Phillips crossed his arms. You know what you did yesterday was extraordinary, right? Most officers would be celebrating, taking credit, making sure everyone knew. Most officers aren't me. No, he agreed. They're not. He paused. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why didn't you defend yourself? When the Admiral when he was being an ass, you could have said something, told him who you were, what you've done. She stopped typing. Her hands rested on the keyboard, still and thoughtful. Because it wouldn't have mattered, she said. He'd already made up his mind about me. Anything I said would have been defensive, weak. People like the Admiral don't respect words. They respect results. So you waited. I waited. That takes discipline. It takes practice. She resumed typing. I've spent most of my career being underestimated, Commander. It used to bother me. Now I see it as an advantage. How so? People who underestimate you give you room to work. They don't watch you as closely. They don't question your methods. And when the moment comes when it really matters, you can act without hesitation. Because you've already done the work, already run the calculations, already prepared for the worst. Phillips absorbed this. You think that's sustainable, living in the shadows, never getting credit. Credit isn't why I do this. She finally looked at him. I do this because someone has to, because the systems we build are only as good as the people who understand them, and because somewhere out there in the real world there are threats that don't care about our technology or our firepower, threats that require someone who can think differently, see differently. Someone like you. Someone like me. He nodded slowly. For what it's worth, Commander, I'm glad you were on my ship. Thank you, sir. He left her there, alone with her screens. And as the sun rose over the Atlantic, painting the water in shades of gold and copper, Evelyn Morgan continued her work. Quiet, methodical, unseen. Exactly how she preferred it. But there was something she was thinking about, something she hadn't told anyone. The drone, Alpha 7, its signature had been familiar, not identical but similar to something she'd encountered years ago in a different theater, on a different mission, one that didn't officially exist. She'd made a note in her personal files, encrypted, backed up on 3 separate drives, because if she was right, if the pattern meant what she thought it meant, then the war games hadn't been just an exercise. They'd been a test. And someone, somewhere, was watching to see if anyone would notice. She noticed. She always noticed. That's what made her dangerous. 3 weeks later, Lieutenant Commander Evelyn Morgan received new orders. Transfer to DARPA, Advanced Weapons Research, classification level beyond top secret, the kind of assignment that came with no public record, no official acknowledgement, no paper trail. She packed her small duffel bag in her quarters aboard the Vigilance. Her belongings fit into one bag. She'd learned long ago to travel light, to leave nothing behind that mattered. Before she left, she made one final visit to the CIC. It was late. The night watch was on duty. The bridge was quiet, illuminated only by the soft glow of monitoring screens. She walked to the secondary console, Point Michael's ward. Someone had cleaned it, polished the brass plaque until it gleamed, a small gesture of respect. She placed her hand on the console, felt its warmth, the vibration of the ship's engines humming through the steel. Thank you, she whispered, to the console, to Michael, to the ship, to the silent professionals who'd come before her and would come after. Then she turned and walked away. No fanfare, no goodbye speeches, no ceremony. Just a quiet woman with a duffel bag, disappearing into the night. But behind her, she left something that couldn't be packed or carried. A standard, an example, a reminder. The junior officer who'd laughed at her during the Admiral's performance stood watch that night. Ensign Davis, young, ambitious, still learning. She'd watched Commander Morgan leave, had wanted to say something, to thank her, to apologize. But the words had caught in her throat. So instead she walked to the secondary console, looked at the brass plaque, read the name etched there. Lieutenant Michael Ward. And beneath it a new plaque, freshly installed. The crew had done it themselves. It read, "In this station, LCDR Evelyn R. Morgan demonstrated that the most powerful weapon system is the mind of a single dedicated sailor. Let all who serve on this vessel remember, competence is quiet." Ensign Davis touched the plaque, made a silent promise. She would remember. She would learn. She would become the kind of officer who didn't need to be loud to be heard, who didn't need credit to do what was right, who understood that true strength wasn't about dominance. It was about discipline, focus, mastery. The ship sailed on through the dark Atlantic, the stars above, the deep below. And somewhere in the world, Evelyn Morgan began her next mission. Unseen, unknown, unstoppable. Years passed. The USS Vigilance continued its service. New crew rotations, new technologies, new challenges. But the story remained. The Morgan Intercept, they called it. It became legend, whispered in training facilities, taught at the Naval Academy, a case study in crisis management and unconventional thinking. Admiral Thorne retired with honors. His final speech to the graduating class at Annapolis was different from anything he'd given before. Quieter, more thoughtful. He spoke about assumptions, about the danger of judging people by appearance, about the importance of listening to the quiet voices in any organization. He never mentioned her name, but everyone knew who he was talking about. The cadets listened. Some understood, others would need time, would need their own moment of humbling before the lesson truly sank in. But the seed was planted. And in the fleet, among the sailors and officers who'd served with her, who'd witnessed what she could do, the standard remained. They looked for the quiet professionals, the ones who didn't seek attention, who didn't need validation, who simply did the work day after day with unwavering excellence. They protected them, promoted them, gave them the space to operate. Because they'd learned. Competence doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. It simply acts. And when the moment comes, when everything is on the line and the systems fail and the algorithms can't keep up, it's the quiet professional, the one everyone overlooked, the one everyone underestimated, who saves the day. Not with speeches, not with bravado. With skill, with discipline, with the calm certainty of someone who's done this 1,000 times in the dark, where no one was watching. That was Evelyn Morgan's legacy. Not a statue, not a monument. A philosophy, a standard. Passed from one generation to the next. Silent, enduring, unbreakable. Somewhere in the world she was still out there, still working, still solving problems no one else could solve, still protecting people who would never know her name. And that was exactly how she wanted it. Because dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And the work, the real work, happens in the quiet spaces between the noise. Where the professionals live. Where excellence doesn't need an audience. Where the mission is everything, and everything else is just noise. That's where you'll find them. The quiet ones. The dangerous ones. The ones who change everything without ever raising their voice.